a stately plantation house, its white columns gleaming against the Alabama summer sky of 1826. Within those walls transpired one of the most meticulously executed acts of retribution in American history, a night of systematic elimination so precise it remained undiscovered until dawn broke over the blood-soaked bridal chamber. This is the account of what historians now refer to as the Magnolia Plantation Massacre, where a bride, known only in fragmented records as Elizabeth Blackwood, orchestrated the deaths of her Klan-affiliated groom and 11 of the organization's founding members during what was meant to be the most celebrated wedding in 3 counties. The Magnolia Plantation stands no longer. Fire claimed the structure in 1851, leaving behind only stone foundations and scattered architectural fragments now consumed by kudzu and southern pine. Archaeological excavations conducted in 1967 revealed an unexpected discovery beneath what was once the main parlor floor, a small leather-bound journal, its pages nearly illegible from water damage and time. Careful restoration by textile conservators at Birmingham Historical Society recovered approximately 60% of the text, enough to piece together the extraordinary narrative that had been buried for over a century. The journal belonged to Elizabeth Blackwood, though this was not her birth name. Her true identity remains one of the many mysteries surrounding the events of June 17, 1826. The recovery of the journal itself represents a remarkable confluence of circumstances. The excavation that uncovered it was initially undertaken to assess the foundation's stability for a proposed historical marker, not as a deliberate archaeological investigation. Dr. Samuel Winters, who led the excavation, noted in his field journal, "The leather binding was initially mistaken for a rotted root system until closer examination revealed its manufactured nature. The location beneath the parlor floorboards, in a cavity that appears deliberately created rather than naturally occurring, suggests intentional concealment. This deliberate preservation effort by Elizabeth provides insight into her awareness of historical documentation. She ensured a record would survive even as she planned her own demise. What we know with certainty is documented in the county marriage records and surviving correspondence between plantation families of the region. Jeremiah Caldwell, son of one of Alabama's wealthiest cotton brokers, announced his engagement to Elizabeth Blackwood in the spring of 1826. The young woman was introduced to society as the orphan niece of a Charleston merchant, sent to Alabama to secure a favorable marriage alliance. Contemporary accounts describe her as uncommonly beautiful but reserved in manner, with an education suggesting northern finishing schools. Her arrival in Alabama coincided with the formation of what historical records obliquely reference as the Circle, now recognized by scholars as one of the earliest iterations of what would later become the Ku Klux Klan. Elizabeth's introduction into Alabama society appears meticulously orchestrated. Social registry documents indicate she arrived with impeccable references from Charleston's elite families, yet subsequent investigation has found no record of her existence in Charleston prior to 1824. The Charleston merchant cited as her uncle, one James Blackwood, did exist, but correspondence discovered in his business records shows a carefully constructed relationship developed through letters rather than blood kinship. One letter from Blackwood to a business associate notes, "The young woman presenting herself as my niece has provided service of significant value to my shipping interests. Her request for introduction to Alabama society is a small price for the intelligence she provided regarding certain blockade opportunities." This suggests Elizabeth secured her false identity through valuable information exchange, demonstrating her understanding of transactional relationships necessary for her infiltration. Elizabeth's journal and its recoverable passages reveals a calculated deception. Her entry dated April 3, 1826, reads, "I have secured Caldwell's interest. His frequent references to the Circle confirm what I suspected. The names are now 12 in total. Preparations continue." The clinical detachment of her writing offers no emotional context, no explanation of her true purpose, in infiltrating this nascent organization. What becomes increasingly clear through subsequent entries is her methodical documentation of names, routines, and private meeting locations. She was conducting surveillance with remarkable precision. The methodological sophistication of Elizabeth's intelligence gathering is particularly evident in her documentation of the Circle's membership. Rather than simply recording names, she developed an elaborate verification system, cross-referencing casual mentions, observed interactions, and intercepted correspondence. A journal entry from November 1825 demonstrates this approach. Confirmed Richardson's involvement today. 3 separate validations now complete. Caldwell's casual reference at dinner, the distinctive ring observed during the Huntsville gathering, and his signature on the property transfer documents for the meeting lodge. The certainty of identification is now absolute. This triple validation methodology for each target shows an understanding of intelligence verification principles that wouldn't be formally codified in espionage tradecraft until the late 19th century. Examination of Jeremiah Caldwell's personal correspondence, preserved in the state archives, provides insights into the formative structure of this early Klan chapter. Letters exchanged with plantation owners throughout the county refer to necessary measures for maintaining proper order and ceremonial bonds of brotherhood, euphemisms for organized violence against freed slaves and sympathetic whites. One particular letter, dated May 9, 1826, mentions that initiation of new brothers shall be conducted following the Caldwell-Blackwood Union, when all senior members shall be in attendance. This wedding was to serve as more than a social function. It was to be a gathering of the organization's leadership. The emergence of the Circle as a precursor to later Klan organizations provides important historical context for understanding both Elizabeth's targets and her methodology. Unlike the post-Civil War Klan, which emerged as a reactionary response to Reconstruction, these early organizations formed during a period when slavery remained legally entrenched but increasingly challenged. Historian Dr. Rebecca Morrison notes, "These proto-Klan organizations emerged specifically to police the boundaries of an institution they correctly perceived as vulnerable. Their violence targeted not only enslaved people seeking freedom, but also the white abolitionists, educators, and religious leaders who provided assistance or advocated for gradual emancipation." This context helps explain the specific targeting of Thomas Harper, whose educational efforts directly challenged the intellectual foundations of racial hierarchy. The Magnolia Plantation wedding was documented extensively in social registers and family correspondence. The guest list included prominent families from 3 states. Of particular interest is the accommodation ledger, which indicates 12 men, including the groom, were assigned rooms in the plantation's east wing, separated from other guests. Elizabeth's journal entry from June 16th, the day before the wedding, contains a detailed map of these room assignments, with notations on door hinges, floorboards, and window mechanisms. The final line reads, "All preparations complete. The tincture is prepared in sufficient quantity." The wedding preparations themselves offered Elizabeth numerous opportunities to perfect her operation. As the bride-to-be, she was granted unprecedented access to the plantation house during the weeks preceding the ceremony. Her journal notes multiple measurement sessions, ostensibly related to decorations and furniture arrangements, that allowed her to document the building's layout in precise detail. One entry reads, "Conducted 3rd measurement of the east corridor today, under the pretext of confirming space for floral arrangements. The servants now leave me unattended during these inspections, considering them mere feminine concerns with decoration. Completed mapping of the secondary service passage, connecting rooms 4 through 9. This exploitation of gendered assumptions about her interests provided essential operational intelligence while raising no suspicions. Toxicological analysis of preserved fabric samples from the site, conducted in 1972, detected traces of Atropa belladonna, deadly nightshade, a plant not indigenous to Alabama, but which historical records confirm was cultivated in the medicinal gardens at Magnolia Plantation. Elizabeth's journal contains several pages dedicated to the extraction process for concentrating the plant's tropane alkaloids, with specific notations on dosages required for sedation versus lethal effect. The level of pharmaceutical knowledge displayed in these notes suggests formal medical training, inconsistent with the limited education available to women in the early 19th century. The pharmaceutical aspects of Elizabeth's operation demonstrate particular sophistication. Rather than employing a single lethal dose, her journal describes a two-stage approach. The initial administration must produce sufficient sedation to ensure immobility without arousing suspicion of foul play. Secondary exposure through dermal absorption can then be employed to deepen unconsciousness during the final approach. Calculated dosages for each target based on observed body weight and alcohol tolerance. This layered approach to incapacitating her targets shows an understanding of pharmacokinetics and absorption rates that reflects advanced medical knowledge. Further journal entries detail her cultivation of belladonna plants in a small garden she maintained under the guise of quote, decorative specimens for the bridal bower, allowing her to harvest and process the material herself rather than risking detection through purchase of suspicious substances. The wedding proceeded on June 17 without incident, according to accounts from surviving guests. The ceremony was held at sunset, followed by an elaborate dinner and dancing that continued well past midnight. Elizabeth was described by attendees as a vision of composure and grace, with one guest noting that the bride herself served the ceremonial brandy to her husband's closest associates, a charming breach of tradition that delighted the company. This brandy service, mentioned in multiple accounts, appears to have been specifically directed at the 12 men identified in Elizabeth's journal. Witness accounts of Elizabeth during the wedding celebrations provide fascinating psychological insights into her operational discipline. Augusta Willoughby, the daughter of a neighboring plantation owner, noted in her diary, "Miss Blackwood maintained such serenity throughout the festivities that several ladies remarked upon it. Where most brides appear flustered or overcome with emotion, she proceeded with an almost ceremonial precision through each interaction, as if following an internal script invisible to observers. I found myself watching her with increasing curiosity as the evening progressed, struck by the contrast between her perfect social performance and the curious emptiness behind her eyes." This observation unwittingly captured the essence of deep cover operational behavior, the flawless external performance masking an entirely different internal reality. What few accounts mention, but what has been subsequently established through analysis of guest registries, is the unusual composition of the wedding party itself. The 12 men who would later be found dead were all assigned roles of significance in the ceremony, despite several being only distant acquaintances of the groom. Their collective presence, wearing matching ceremonial pins later identified in Elizabeth's journal as markers of their organizational rank, represented an unprecedented gathering of the leadership structure. Elizabeth had orchestrated not merely a wedding, but a confluence of targets that would not have otherwise assembled in one location. The ceremonial aspects of the wedding reveal Elizabeth's sophisticated understanding of the circle's internal dynamics. By embedding organizational ritual within the socially acceptable framework of wedding tradition, she effectively created what modern intelligence operatives would term a closed-access target environment, a situation where all targets are gathered in a controlled setting under predictable conditions. Her journal entry from April 28 demonstrates this deliberate design. Proposed to Jeremiah a ceremonial structure incorporating elements I recognized from their private gatherings. His enthusiasm confirms my assessment. They perceive the wedding as an extension of their brotherhood rituals, rather than recognizing my appropriation of their symbols for identification purposes. The vanity of men makes them blind to manipulation through their own iconography. This represents an advanced understanding of how to exploit organizational psychology for operational advantage. A recovered fragment of Elizabeth's journal dated May 20th notes, "The circle requires 12 present for all matters of consequence. The ceremonial number must be maintained. Their superstition becomes their vulnerability." This insight into the organizational protocol of the early Klan structure suggests Elizabeth had identified a critical weakness, the requirement for full leadership attendance at significant events, and exploited it through her matrimonial deception. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, as documented in the plantation overseer's log, the celebration concluded and guests retired to their assigned rooms. Elizabeth's final journal entry, presumably written shortly thereafter, contains only, "Justice comes with the night. By my hand, 12 debts shall be paid." The execution phase of Elizabeth's operation demonstrates remarkable tactical adaptability. Household staff testimony, recorded during the investigation but subsequently sealed until the documents were discovered in 1983, indicates an unexpected complication arose when one target, Colonel James Witherspoon, requested a room change due to a leaking roof above his assigned chamber. Elizabeth's contingency planning is evident in how she addressed this disruption. The staff witness reported, "The bride herself attended to the colonel's complaint, suggesting with perfect composure that he might prefer the small study adjacent to the library rather than waiting for another guest room to be prepared. She personally escorted him there, ensuring the chambermaid prepared the correct bedding." This improvised solution maintained her operational sequence while adapting to unexpected circumstances, a hallmark of sophisticated tactical planning. What transpired in the subsequent hours can only be pieced together through forensic examination of the limited physical evidence and contradictory testimonies recorded in the ensuing investigation. By dawn, 13 people were dead, the 12 men of what Elizabeth had termed the Circle, including her groom, and Elizabeth herself. The bodies of the men were discovered in their beds, each with a single precisely placed laceration across the throat, severing the carotid artery. The method suggested knowledge of human anatomy and considerable physical strength. Elizabeth was found in the bridal chamber, a self-administered dose of belladonna, evident from the emptied vial, still clutched in her hand. Forensic reconstruction of the events, compiled from coroner's reports and subsequent medical analysis, indicates Elizabeth moved through the East Wing with extraordinary efficiency. The estimated time between the first and last killing is approximately 42 minutes, a remarkably compressed time frame suggesting a predetermined route and methodology. The absence of defensive wounds on any victim indicates they were incapacitated or deeply unconscious during the act. Toxicology findings, though limited by the techniques available in the 1970s when the samples were first analyzed, indicate significant levels of belladonna compounds in tissue samples from all victims, consistent with the tincture referenced in Elizabeth's journal. The sequence in which the men were killed, determined by blood coagulation patterns and body temperature estimates noted in the original medical examiner's report, reveals a strategic approach that minimized risk of discovery. Elizabeth began with the rooms furthest from the main hall, working methodically toward the bridal chamber, where her husband would be her final victim before taking her own life. The calculated nature of this sequence contradicts early theories of a crime of passion or momentary insanity, instead pointing to an operation planned with tactical precision. The precise anatomical knowledge demonstrated in the method of killing provides further evidence of Elizabeth's medical training. Dr. Marion Blackwell, forensic pathologist who reviewed the original autopsy findings in 1978, observed, "The consistency of the wounds across all 12 victims is remarkable. Each laceration begins precisely at the same anatomical point, follows the identical angle across the throat, and terminates at the corresponding location on the opposite side. This uniformity suggests not merely anatomical knowledge, but practice technique, the kind of muscle memory developed through repeated surgical procedures." This assessment aligns with the reference to Elizabeth's medical training in Vienna, where surgical instruction would have included extensive anatomical study. The biomechanical aspects of the killings also suggest specialized training. Dr. Blackwell noted, "The depth and precision of the lacerations indicate they were executed from behind the victims, with the assailant's left arm restraining the head, while the right hand administered the cut in a single, fluid motion. This technique bears striking resemblance to methods documented in military field surgical manuals of the early 19th century, specifically procedures for emergency tracheotomies performed on wounded soldiers. This correlation between Elizabeth's methodology and military medical techniques reinforces theories of her formal medical training, while adding the possibility of battlefield medical experience. The official investigation, conducted by county authorities and documented in courthouse records, concluded that a murderous intruder had infiltrated the plantation and committed the killings before escaping. This explanation satisfied public records, but private correspondence between investigating officials reveals significant inconsistencies. The plantation's perimeter security reported no breaches, all doors remained locked from within, and no tracks were discovered despite the rain-softened ground. Most tellingly, a letter from the lead investigator to the governor references the peculiar precision of the wounds and the curious fact that only members of a certain affiliation were targeted, suggesting awareness of the selective nature of the killings. Of particular interest is the deliberate construction of the intruder narrative by authorities. Recently declassified correspondence between the lead investigator and several prominent families in the region reveals coordinated efforts to suppress the true nature of events. One letter states, "The necessity of maintaining a unified account cannot be overstated. The implications of a woman, particularly one who penetrated the highest echelons of society, having orchestrated such a comprehensive elimination of the leadership, would damage public confidence in our institutions beyond repair." This institutional commitment to alternative facts demonstrates how profoundly Elizabeth's actions threatened the social order. The political dimensions of the cover-up extended beyond local authorities. Correspondence between the Alabama governor and representatives in Washington references the incident in carefully coded language. The unfortunate matter at Magnolia has been contained with appropriate narrative management. No connection to the auxiliary social organization has been permitted in any official documentation. The senator concurs that national interests are best served by attribution to external malefactors. This high-level involvement in suppressing the true nature of the incident suggests recognition that Elizabeth's actions threatened not merely local power structures, but the broader institutional framework supporting early 19th century Southern society. A more compelling theory emerges from Elizabeth's fragmented journal. Entries dating back nearly 3 years before her appearance in Alabama reference the lynching of a man identified only as Thomas in northern Georgia. The description of this event aligns with documented Klan activity from that region. One partially legible passage reads, "They took him under moonshadow, 12 men in ceremony. I recorded each face in memory, every name to paper. The oath made that night binds me still." While the complete nature of her connection to the victim remains unclear, the systematic elimination of 12 specific men suggests a calculated act of retribution. Further investigation into historical records from northern Georgia during this period revealed additional context for Elizabeth's motivation. County death records document the lynching of a schoolteacher named Thomas Harper on April 14, 1823. Harper had established a small school that educated both white and formerly enslaved children, a direct challenge to the racial hierarchy that emerging Klan groups sought to preserve. Contemporary newspaper accounts, while oblique in their description, noted that 12 prominent citizens addressed a matter of community concern regarding inappropriate educational practices. The timing and circumstances aligned precisely with Elizabeth's journal references. The educational work of Thomas Harper represented a particular threat to the racial order of early 19th century Georgia. Historical records indicate his school operated on principles derived from Quaker educational philosophy, emphasizing equality of intellectual capacity across racial boundaries. An editorial in the Georgia State Register from February 1823 condemned Northern educational methods being implemented in our midst that dangerously suggest intellectual parity between the races, likely referring to Harper's school. This ideological challenge, more than the simple fact of educating black children, would have motivated organized violence against him from groups dedicated to preserving racial hierarchy through intimidation and murder. Examination of census records and church registries from Georgia during the corresponding period identifies Thomas Harper more completely. He was listed as a graduate of Oberlin College, one of the few institutions at that time accepting both black and white students. Parish records also document his marriage to a woman named Eleanor Pierce in 1820, described as educated in medical arts under European tutelage. No further documentation of Eleanor Harper exists after the date of Thomas's lynching in 1823, creating the compelling possibility that Elizabeth Blackwood was an identity assumed by Eleanor Harper for the purpose of infiltration and retribution. Additional evidence for this connection emerges from an unexpected source. The registry of a small Quaker meeting house in Pennsylvania records the attendance of Eleanor Pierce at their gatherings between 1817 and 1819, describing her as recently returned from Vienna, where she pursued medical studies under the guidance of Dr. Heinrich Friedrich. This aligns precisely with the reference in Elijah Thornton's letter to Elizabeth's training, Under Drive, Friedrich in Vienna, and provides the crucial link between Eleanor Pierce's documented medical education and Elizabeth Blackwood's pharmaceutical and anatomical expertise. The timeline between Harper's murder and Elizabeth's appearance in Alabama society suggests an extraordinary period of preparation and intelligence gathering. A journal entry dated September 1823, 5 months after the lynching, reads, "I have confirmed the sixth name today. The merchant in Savannah provided the connection I suspected. 6 more remain, then the work begins in earnest." This methodical approach to identifying her targets indicates a level of investigative skill and patience rarely documented in 19th century records. The intermediate period between Thomas Harper's murder and Elizabeth's emergence in Charleston society represents a crucial gap in the historical record. One potential insight comes from shipping manifests discovered during research into abolitionist maritime networks. The passenger list of the merchant vessel Windward, which traveled from Savannah to Boston in June 1823, includes an E. Pierce widow. Boston abolitionist circles maintain documented connections with European medical institutions, particularly in Vienna and Paris, suggesting a potential pathway for Eleanor to refresh or enhance her medical training before beginning her infiltration operation. Another recovered journal fragment, dated to early 1824, provides insight into her methodology. 3 months observing Judge Whitfield's household has confirmed the pattern. The circle maintains no written membership but relies on verbal confirmation and ritual. The organizational structure extends through 3 counties with Caldwell as the central node. The path becomes clear. This identification of Jeremiah Caldwell as her entry point to the organization demonstrates Elizabeth's strategic approach to her infiltration. Elizabeth's selection of Caldwell as her primary target reveals sophisticated network analysis. County records indicate Caldwell served as both a prominent businessman and judicial circuit liaison, positions that provided him with connections across institutional boundaries. Elizabeth's journal notes, Caldwell's commercial interests intersect with judicial functions, religious leadership, and militia command, a confluence of authority unusual in a single individual. Removing this connectivity node will create maximum organizational disruption. This identification of what network theorists would later term a central node demonstrates remarkable analytical insight, targeting not merely a symbolic leader but the individual whose elimination would cause maximum structural damage to the organization. The sophisticated methodology of both the infiltration and the killings suggests extraordinary determination and preparation. Elizabeth's journal indicates she spent nearly 3 years gathering intelligence on Klan membership and movement throughout the region, before identifying Jeremiah Caldwell as her entry point to the Alabama chapter. Her pharmaceutical knowledge, anatomical precision, and strategic planning reflect capabilities far beyond conventional education for women of the period. Historical researchers have speculated she may have received medical training abroad, possibly in France or Germany, where limited opportunities for female physicians existed. Medical historian Dr. Caroline Sutherland, in her 2005 analysis of Elizabeth's pharmaceutical notes, observed, "The precision of the belladonna extraction method described in these fragments exceeds standard medical knowledge available in American universities of the period. The techniques align more closely with advanced European pharmacological practices, particularly those taught at the University of Vienna during the early 1820s. This assessment aligns with the reference in Elijah Thornton's letter to Elizabeth's training, under Dr. Friedrich in Vienna, suggesting she possessed formal medical education disguised beneath her persona as a genteel Southern bride." The historical context of women's medical education in Vienna during this period provides important perspective on Elizabeth's training. The Vienna General Hospital, Allgemeines Krankenhaus, had begun accepting limited numbers of female medical students from abroad during the early 19th century, though they were generally barred from formal degree programs. Dr. Heinrich Friedrich, identified in multiple sources as Elizabeth's mentor, appears in hospital records as an instructor in surgical applications of botanical compounds, a specialized field that aligns precisely with the pharmaceutical and anatomical skills Elizabeth employed in her operation. Perhaps most remarkable is Elizabeth's psychological capacity to maintain her cover identity while systematically preparing to eliminate her targets. Modern psychological analysis suggests this level of compartmentalization. The ability to perform convincingly as an affectionate fiancée while planning the elimination of her betrothed requires exceptional mental discipline. Dr. Rebecca Harlow, in her study of historical cases of deep cover operatives, notes, "The Blackwood case represents an unprecedented example of sustained tactical deception in a pre-modern intelligence context. The ability to maintain operational focus, while embedded in intimate proximity to her targets for nearly 2 years, would challenge even contemporary trained intelligence professionals." Elizabeth's journal entries reveal occasional glimpses of the psychological toll of her mission. One entry from January 1826 reads, "Attended sermon with Jeremiah today. Pastor spoke of Judas's betrayal with such vehemence that several ladies wept. Jeremiah squeezed my hand throughout, assuring me later of his absolute trust. The irony was almost unbearable. These moments of self-awareness punctuate the otherwise clinical recording of her operational preparations, suggesting a complex psychological landscape beneath her calculated exterior." The psychological techniques Elizabeth employed to maintain her cover identity demonstrate sophisticated self-management strategies. A journal entry from February 1826 provides insight into her methods. Established additional compartmentalization protocol today. When engaged in social functions requiring genuine appearing affection, I now visualize Thomas's face superimposed over Caldwell's, allowing authentic emotional response while maintaining operational focus. The technique proves most effective. This deliberate manipulation of her own emotional responses to maintain cover shows an understanding of psychological principles that would not be formally incorporated into intelligence tradecraft until the mid-20th century. Another entry, dated 3 months before the wedding, provides additional psychological insight. Attended the execution of a slave accused of striking his overseer. Jeremiah and his associates watched with satisfaction evident in their posture and expressions. I mirrored their stance perfectly while cataloging each face in memory. The compartmentalization becomes more natural with practice. I wonder if this is how physicians maintain composure during surgery, by separating the person from the procedure. This sophisticated awareness of her own psychological mechanisms suggests extraordinary self-awareness and emotional control. The preparations for the wedding itself appear throughout the journal as both social obligations and operational milestones. Elizabeth records details of dress fittings that double as opportunities to secure the specialized alterations to her wedding gown. She documents menu planning sessions that allowed her to confirm which spirits would be served to specific guests, facilitating her plan to introduce the belladonna tincture. Each social requirement of a bride-to-be was transformed into an operational advantage through her methodical approach. A particularly revealing entry from 2 weeks before the wedding reads, "Final dress fitting completed." The modifications are invisible to external examination but provide access to all necessary implements. Practiced movement in full costume to confirm freedom of motion and silence of fabric. Satisfied with the result. Mrs. Hampton, the seamstress, commented that no bride in her experience has ever been so attentive to the details of her wedding attire. If she only knew the purpose behind such attention. This entry demonstrates Elizabeth's ability to disguise operational preparation within expected social behaviors. The wedding itself represented the culmination of Elizabeth's years of planning, a perfect convergence of social convention and tactical opportunity. Her journal entry from the morning of June 17th contains a single line. The day arrives at last. The path narrows to its inevitable conclusion. The clinical brevity of this entry, compared to the detailed operational notes that preceded it, suggests a psychological shift from planning to execution mode. The transition point where preparation concludes and action begins. The final hours of Elizabeth's life, after completing her systematic elimination of the Klan leadership, remain a subject of scholarly debate. The official determination of suicide by belladonna poisoning aligns with physical evidence, but the motivation behind this final act is unclear. Some historians argue it represents a pragmatic decision to avoid capture and questioning, while others suggest a more complex psychological conclusion to her mission. The position of her body in the bridal chamber, arranged with ceremonial precision on the bed, still wearing her wedding gown, suggests ritualistic elements to her final act. Forensic analysis of the bridal chamber scene, reconstructed from multiple witness accounts, indicates Elizabeth returned to her chamber after completing the 12 killings, changed from the practical garments she likely wore during the operation back into her wedding dress, arranged herself on the bed with arms crossed over her chest, and then consumed a lethal dose of belladonna tincture. This deliberate return to her bridal identity for her final act suggests symbolic significance beyond mere operational necessity. A fragment of what appears to be her final journal entry, partially recovered through advanced imaging techniques in 2011, reads, "The circle is complete. 12 knots untied by my hand. The 13th remains. The witness must follow the judged into darkness. What was torn asunder cannot be restored." The reference to herself as the witness provides insight into how she perceived her role in this act of retribution. This concept of Elizabeth as the witness, rather than merely an agent of vengeance, adds philosophical depth to her actions. It suggests she saw herself not simply as an executioner, but as the embodiment of accountability, the human record of crimes that would otherwise go undocumented and unpunished. Her decision to end her own life following the completion of her mission can be interpreted as the final act of a witness whose testimony has been delivered and whose purpose has been fulfilled. Archaeological examination of the bridal chamber foundations during the 1967 excavation uncovered a small tin box sealed within the wall behind the headboard, a hiding place noted in Elizabeth's journal diagrams. Inside was a locket containing a braided lock of dark hair and a small hand-drawn portrait of a man presumed to be Thomas. This personal artifact, deliberately concealed in a location where she planned her final moments, represents the only concrete connection to her life before becoming Elizabeth Blackwood. The contents of this hidden cache suggest a more complex motivation than clinical retribution. The preservation of this intimate memento in her final location indicates that, beneath the calculated operational exterior, Elizabeth maintained a profound emotional connection to her former identity and to Thomas. The juxtaposition of this deeply personal artifact with her methodical elimination of 12 targets suggests that the entire operation, despite its clinical execution, remained fundamentally rooted in human emotion, a fact she kept hidden even from her journal. The broader historical implications of the Magnolia Plantation incident extend beyond the immediate disruption of early Klan organization in Alabama. Analysis of membership patterns in subsequent decades reveals a significant cooling effect on recruitment throughout the Deep South, with contemporary accounts referring obliquely to the Alabama incident as a cautionary tale. The methodologies of secret societies throughout the region changed markedly in the aftermath, with increased screening of new members and fragmentation of leadership to prevent similarly concentrated eliminations. Historical analysis of regional secret society structures before and after the Magnolia Plantation incident reveals a fundamental shift in organizational security. Whereas the Circle operated with centralized leadership and ritual gatherings, subsequent iterations adopted distributed cell structures with limited knowledge between units. A letter from a former peripheral member of the Circle to a colleague in Mississippi, dated 1829, explicitly references this adaptation. The errors of Alabama must not be repeated. No gathering should include more than 3 ranking members, and no single individual should possess identification of more than 7 associates. The woman taught us the vulnerability of concentration. Elizabeth Blackwood represents a unique figure in the shadowed counterhistory of resistance to organized racial violence in America, an agent of retribution operating with clinical precision rather than impulsive emotion. Her systematic infiltration and elimination of the Alabama Klan leadership demonstrates a level of strategic thinking typically attributed only to formal military or intelligence operations of the period. The complete absence of her true identity from historical records speaks to both her exceptional operational security and the effectiveness with which power structures can obscure narratives that challenge established order. The methodological sophistication of Elizabeth's operation has drawn increasing attention from modern intelligence historians. Dr. Catherine Reynolds of the Institute for Historical Security Studies notes, "The Blackwood operation represents a remarkable case study in deep cover infiltration, target development, and strategic elimination that would be recognized as exceptional even by modern operational standards. The completeness of her penetration into the target organization, the precision of her intelligence gathering, and the tactical execution of her objective demonstrate capabilities that would not be formalized in intelligence doctrine for another century." The Wedding Night Massacre at Magnolia Plantation remains one of the most meticulously executed acts of targeted elimination in American history. The precision planning, the years of deep cover identity maintenance, the careful selection of methods and timing all point to an operation that transcends simple revenge. Yet the final image that emerges from the fragmented evidence is of a woman who, having completed her mission with extraordinary discipline, chose to take her own life, rather than return to whatever existence preceded her transformation into Elizabeth Blackwood. The locket concealed in the bridal chamber wall suggests that despite her clinical execution, an emotional core, perhaps the original motivation for her actions, remained intact until the end. The physical structure of Magnolia Plantation exists now only in archaeological fragments, yet the psychological architecture of Elizabeth's operation continues to be studied by historians specializing in resistance movements and covert operations. What remains most remarkable is how completely she would have vanished from historical record had her journal not survived. How thoroughly the story of one woman's systematic dismantling of an emerging power structure would have been erased. It raises the unsettling question of how many similar acts of resistance have been successfully obscured, their agents rendered invisible by the very power structures they opposed. Beyond the stately columns and manicured grounds lies a hidden narrative of calculated justice, of elaborate deception maintained for years, of a bride who transformed her wedding night into an operation of clinical precision. When 12 men of influence and their carefully infiltrated 13th member experienced a reckoning orchestrated by a woman whose true name remains lost to history, they became a footnote in a shadowed counter-narrative of American resistance, a testament to how a single determined individual can methodically dismantle systems of power that believe themselves invulnerable.